Hi, it's Ricky Spencer, and welcome to another of our Sociology of Media Voices series. And now this is part two of our interview with Rachel Thomas, who's a community activist in the area of disability inclusion and accessibility. And we have already learned that Rachel does a lot of work in this space. She's an accomplished artist and she works tirelessly in her community spaces to make life better for everybody in the disability inclusion community and their families, loved ones, and really disrupting ableism. So it's over to Rachel to give us a quick little brief about who they are.
Hi, I'm Rachel or Rach. I live with intersectional, psychosocial, and neurological disabilities, and I am an artist, like Ricky said, and I also work in disability advocacy voluntarily, and I really enjoy it. I love helping create accessibility awareness and actual accessibility on the ground for people with disabilities. I think that, there's no excuses not to have accessibility these days. So I like being involved in that.
Fabulous. And in this section, Rachel is going to talk to us on a couple of topics. The first one will be on accessible housing and some of the considerations that people need to consider. Like, what does accessible housing mean and what it sort of entails? The other space, Rachel will then talk to us about their view of codesign and how codesign can enable people with different accessibility needs, people living with disabilities, to be part of decision making and in governance. And then Rachel will forward to us about why accessibility is so problematic in organisations. So we delve a bit deeper into those spaces. And then we hear about where Rachel sees themselves in the next couple of years and the footprints that they would like to leave. So it's over to you, Rach, and let's maybe explore the first one. What is accessible housing and why is it important?
Accessible housing is housing that people can actually function in when they have disabilities and when they have significant functional impairments. For example, I was in hospital in 2019 for 5 months, and they wanted to send me home to a nursing home because my home was a split level unit with stairs, and I became dependent on a wheelchair during that hospital stay, and I've been in a wheelchair ever since. And they didn't want to send me home to a split level unit because it meant I couldn't access my kitchen. I couldn't get to the front door. I couldn't access my art studio, which was my lounge room and dining room. I couldn't get into my shower. It had a hob on the front, which is like the little edge in front of the shower. I couldn't roll a wheelchair into it. So it meant I chose myself to go home there anyway because I didn't want to go to a nursing home. I felt like a nursing home was for end of life care and not for someone in their 40s. So I went home to inaccessible housing, and it forced me to be bedridden for the next 3 years and 8 months until I could get, quite accessible housing. And it meant that for the rest of the time I was in that unit, while I desperately explored other options and desperately tried to get out of there, I couldn't have a shower for 14 months and 16 days. It was a situation of severe neglect. For a while, I was having someone visit me every 10 weeks, and I had no food security. I couldn't get to the front door to even get food delivered from a supermarket. I couldn't put my rubbish outside because I used to feed crows, and the crows would open my rubbish and roll my cat food everywhere. So I was triple bagging my rubbish and putting it in the bathtub and shutting the bathroom door. Um, but the flies still got in it and it smelled like a tip.
Mm.
And then, 10 weeks later, someone would come and they would take my rubbish to the bin outside, and it just was horrifically stinky. Um, I had 3 cats I was feeding during this time as well, so it was indescribably stressful.
Mm.
Um, it took me about 6 months to I was in an office of housing place. It took me about 6 months to work out that it couldn't be renovated to be accessible, that there wasn't room to make a accessible bathroom. There wasn't room to put a ramp inside or outside. Um, Friends eventually did put a ramp out the back into the garage, but there was no room for the front. Sorry, my alarm's going off. That's not good. To remind me to come on to this, actually. And it took another 8 months to attempt to get a functional capacity report to apply for specialist disability accommodation. That is one option for accessible housing that the government is offering. It's not necessarily a linear process to get SDA or specialist disability accommodation. And for me, it took a really long time. The 8 months that we tried to get a functional capacity report assessment by an occupational therapist, she actually wasn't able to do one successfully in a way that would be acceptable for SDA housing. So we had to get a different occupational therapist after 8 months and get one done properly. She was offered free training by the Summer Foundation, which educates and trains and does research about accessible housing and works to keep young people out of nursing homes, and she refused it. It was a really difficult situation. So I was bedridden the whole time. I had to have 24-hour care eventually. My daughter's room became a little kitchenette upstairs with me, and because I couldn't access the kitchen. And so my daughter had no bedroom. And of course, my carers who lived with me 24 hours a day had to use her bed in that room to sleep overnight. So my daughter lived in the country with her father most of the time and had access with me, but she could no longer stay with me for access. It was quite impactful having that lag accessing housing. And then when I finally did get the paperwork in, it took another 2 months to get it approved. And then it took more months for NDIS to zone my funding in the correct area so that the building that I am in now, that I moved into, could get the correct funding. I couldn't move here until it was in the correct zone. So yes, once I moved here into high physical support specialist disability accommodation, within 2 months, I was out of bed. I was up and about every single day, and I was active. Instead of being bedridden for 3 years and 8 months, it was an incredible transformation. Being in this specialist disability accommodation has been life-changing for me. It hasn't been just an investment in one person. It's been an investment in the community, because now I can do activism, I can do advocacy for people who are disabled. I can support a lot of people now. And it's not entirely accessible though. So accessibility guidelines really need improving for specialist disability accommodation. I've been here over a year and I still can't brush my teeth at a sink. I still can't wash dishes in a sink. This SDA, high physical support SDA, is fully compliant with all the guidelines. It isn't breaking any guidelines. It's just that the guidelines are not good enough for my disability. They don't suit my disability well enough. For example, if I were to need hoisting, I would eventually need a hoist in the bathroom, and I can't have one here because the walls need reinforcing. I would have to move. There's no universal design here. So the benches, the cooktops and the sinks don't change height depending what wheelchair I'm in, and my neurological disability is permanent with episodic changes to my paralysis, etc. So sometimes I'm in the manual wheelchair, which I'm in now, and sometimes I'm in the motorized wheelchair, and depending on which wheelchair I'm in, I will need the things at different heights. So it's quite a process to get them height adjusted when there's no lever or mechanism to adjust them easily. And it's very expensive to get them changed if you don't make them universal design when it's built. The distance between the edge of the bench and the mouth of the sink is too wide for me to be able to brush my teeth and lean over and like spit water in a sink. Yeah, the kitchen cooktop, sink and bench have been lowered to high physical support SDA guideline lowest amount that they suggest. They could be lowered like another this far, but they refused to do that because the guidelines didn't say they had to, and I can't properly reach them still. So it would have been better for my disability had they lowered it more. Yeah, there's just, yeah, the guidelines do need improving.
And maybe if I'm hearing you right, Rachel, it seems that sometimes some of us in the research spaces sometimes forget that when we talk about built spaces and disability accessibility and the architecture and planning, we have to understand that it's not like you build a space and then it's stagnant and you can walk away. So if I'm
Yes.
hearing you correctly, you're saying that it has to be flexible and adaptable to
Yeah,
your circumstances, whether you use one
yeah,
type of accessible device or another. And
yeah,
that in itself needs a lot of planning. And it sort of leads
yeah,
us now into the next question, because part of that planning needs to be with people going through lived experience. And in the last couple of years, there's been a reshift back into something called co-design. And Rachel, can you perhaps tell us a little bit about your view of co-design, especially in the advocacy of spaces?
yeah. I'm part of an awesome co-design committee that some really other cool people are part of as well. Um, I'm part of Your Way Through with Drummond Street.
Mhm.
You're actually part of that committee with me. um, and people with lived experience in disabilities and issues that the Disability Royal Commission are addressing, that's violence, abuse, exploitation, and neglect, as well as practitioners and admin for Drummond Street and for Your Way Through, are part of this co-design committee, and Your Way Through supports people affected by issues of the Disability Royal Commission, and also wanting to make submissions to the Disability Royal Commission. The great thing about co-design is it really helps make disability services for co-design and disability. It helps make disability services and programs safer and more accessible for people with disabilities. It gives people with disabilities representation and a voice within services that affect us. Again, it's nothing about us without us. It also helps. So in the co-design group with Your Way Through, we also help define what does accessible mean and what does safe mean for people with disabilities. And there are people in the group with very diverse disabilities so that they can offer really broad perspectives and hopefully nut out things that each other might not think of, because our disabilities and life experience is quite different from each other. We discuss, create, and review programs and accessibility, basically, that Your Way Through is planning. And sometimes we even help run some programs. And I think that co-design should be in every disability and minority service. I think that it is an essential way to keep things safe and accessible. I think without it, you're going to miss stuff, really significant stuff, really obvious stuff. And I think that it'll be very quick to pick up which services have co-design and which don't have co-design when you're using them as a client or a participant.
And how do you feel working in a space in this co-design group with other people with, you mentioned diverse disabilities? Do you feel that being in a space with like-minded people with that shared experience helps build your own sense of empowerment for change?
Yeah, it's really amazing being with people with disabilities and also able-bodied people in that group, and being heard and having a voice, and actually realizing that, hey, my lived experience matters and it can help other people. And just by showing up and having a voice there, like, you can help other people be safe and help other people access stuff, and be included and help people participate, because people with disabilities have a lot to contribute and have a lot of strengths, and it's really important that they are included in society. Ableism is something that is very important to identify and recognize. In my understanding, ableism is when a perfect person is seen as an able-bodied, young, working-aged, often white male, not always. And the farther you get from that, the less value a person is and the less a person can contribute. So that's kind of the lens that I see ableism as. And to support any services or organizations in leaning away from that and recognizing worth and value and contribution, and inclusivity, I think is really vital. It's very important.
Very much food for thought for us. And going on that, the vitality aspect, why is accessibility so problematic in organisations?
I would say that organizations often don't prioritize disabilities. They often disabilities are an afterthought. And I mean, 20% of the voting public identify as living with a disability. That is 1 in 5 people. That is quite significant. That is not, a small minority. I think invisible disabilities are hard to spot. So I think people don't recognize how many people identify as living within a disability, because a lot of disabilities are hard to spot. For example, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, people being on the autism spectrum, having ADHD, being immunocompromised. There's a lot of disabilities that you can't just see, and they're harder to identify. I think often people with disabilities are more isolated than non-disabled people, and when you're more isolated, you're also harder to see. Often people have an archaic view of disabilities, and you can tell when they have an archaic view of disabilities because they're not up with current language or best practice around disabilities, or how to treat people with disabilities, or how to include people with disabilities. I think it's so important to include voices of people with disabilities. Ask us, what do you need? How can we assist you to be included? How can we make this accessible? Co-design is so vital in disability services and all minority services. Understand power dynamics and use your power as an abled person or a disabled person to make sure people with disabilities are included. People with disabilities have a lot to offer. We are of worth. We can contribute. So find out how to make it happen.
And maybe on that, Rachel, maybe you can explore the point. I remember you telling us a story about how recently you went to a community meeting, and you had issues going through the accessible door, and how you kind of overcame that and reshaped that. Maybe explain to the audience how you used some of the principles of co-design in that sort of dealing with that a situation that you had said you had found yourself in.
I went to an event and I took along a ramp that I knew worked with my manual wheelchair. And they also had a ramp at the event. And I was told that there was a step into the venue. The ramp that they had was the exact width of my motorized wheelchair wheels, like the width. And trying to go up into the event, so I tried my short and very steep ramp that I had used my manual wheelchair in earlier, and it was too steep, and my motorized wheelchair has 6 wheels and it's mid-wheel drive. So as soon as that mid-wheel came off the ground, it just spun and I couldn't go anywhere. So I couldn't use that ramp. So I used the narrow ramp and I fell off the ramp with the wheelchair. So it was dangerous. So we tried again anyway, and I got inside, but we realized I wasn't going to get outside safely. I was now too high up. It was too dangerous. Someone had built a ramp the day before as a sort of plan D or E, in case it was needed. It was needed to get me out, but it wasn't a great ramp and it was kind of like steps. So I had to get out using that ramp like steps. And the whole time I was sitting in the venue, I was worried, oh, what if there's a fire? Like, how am
Mm,
I going to get out? And I was looking at the flags that were hanging, and I was thinking, which flag are they going to wrap me in to get me out? Because that's who's got paralysis, is wrap them in fabric and carry them.
mm,
Um, and I was thinking, how am I going to get out of here if there's a fire? Because the person had to go and get the ramp. It wasn't with them, and they left the venue. And I was by myself, like, as far as, you know, the accessibility person had left. And so anyway, so we did get out at the end of the venue and down these stairs of this ramp that was built. And this the organization that it was with actually really learned a lot from this, and I felt very empowered that just by showing up at that event, it um it opened doors that wouldn't have been opened up if I'd stayed home and didn't show up. And I'm not suggesting to people to fall off a ramp to get things done. But because I went and because I was visible and they realized, oh, there's disabled people, there's
mm,
people with disabilities who actually need access to venues. Oh, we better do something about it. So then I started working with someone else and with other people, and teams grew, multiple teams grew. And a wonderful woman started liaisoning between groups of people and creating documents of accessibility, both about venue choice, about operational guidelines of venues, about office choice, about operational guidelines of offices, and about basic accessibility. And these documents are just absolutely amazing. They're brilliant. And this would not have happened as quickly if I hadn't have gone there and tried the ramp and they hadn't have realized that, oh, you know, we really do need to make venues
mm.
accessible. I
And
think
part of
showing
that,
up is really
yeah,
powerful.
yeah, and a part of that, Rachel, I remember you mentioning that as part of your working process is that you wanted to start developing access keys for
Mm.
various events that being involved with the accessible greens that you felt were important for other people who can come into spaces. Can you tell everybody who's listening what is an access key and how it would be beneficial for every organization, even universities, classrooms, to have one?
Yeah, Drummond Street is has created an access key. And an access key is a, a written plan with a map, with a, a floor plan, with details about public transport, with details about all accessibility information. And um, it it details all sorts of things: where to find light switches, which light switches turn on which lights, what the ramps are like, what the signage is like, how high the chairs are, how far the distance is between the chairs and the tables, where the rooms are, how to get public transport there, um, what the toilets are like. Do you dry your hands with a paper towel or with a blow air dryer, hand dryer? All sorts of information about accessibility. And access keys can be really useful for people to be able to look over before they go to a venue to decide, is that venue going to be accessible for me or not? Is it going to meet my accessibility needs? And to help people feel safe if they do choose to go to the venue because they already know what to expect. Um, And if there's an emergency, the persons can or have already looked over the access key to know how to get out, where the first aid kit is, where the toilet is, whatever details they might need to know in advance. And it just gives people more empowerment and more safety, and more security going to places. So with the Greens, we are hoping to develop a series of access keys for different buildings to help people know if places are going to be accessible for them and if it's going to be a safe experience for them, and to give people idea of what they can predict.
Wonderful. And now, Rachel, tell us, where do you see yourself? What's your plans for the next 2 to 3 years?
I would love a very peaceful life as far as NDIS goes. I would love really calm funding and predictable funding. That would be really helpful. I am very lucky to have my teenager living with me now, and I definitely want that to continue. Um, I want to have a happy life working in my garden. I love my garden. I want to do art with people. I want to do more advocacy. I want to do more activism. I want to keep working on accessibility anywhere. I would love any opportunities to work with inclusion, participation for people with disabilities, with guidelines for things like specialist disability accommodation, all that kind of stuff. I love co-design teams. I really believe in them. I think that they're vital. I think that things like intersectional disabilities need more understanding. And I think that I would love to do any work to help them be understood better. I think there's just so much scope for great projects around the corner, and I can't wait to see what comes around. I'd like to do more work with the LGBTIQA plus community. I'm just excited about life. I can tell that there's just so many things on the doorstep, and I know that being in an accessible housing is like a launching pad to be able to do lots of cool stuff.
That's wonderful. So thank you so much, Rachel Thomas, for being here on at the Sociology of Media Voices series. And if anybody in university spaces, community organizations, or you know of anyone that's looking for a consumer advocate to go on their advisory boards, or looking for someone with lived experience who's very articulate, and can be a consultant for your organizations, we will leave Rachel's details with her bio below. Thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us, Rachel, to really give us a deep understanding of disability inclusion and the power of co-design.
Thank you so much, Ricky. I'm really grateful for having a voice and for all the people that you give a voice to. Thank you kindly.
Thank you.